and other areas, and that this is problematic, plus aviation's impacts in general are tremendous, and there are several reports talking about these impacts. I cannot specifically say here in the United States that air traffic is increasing as flights are now combining so that jets don't fly almost empty or half full. So I don't know that there's an increase in jet traffic exactly, even though that's the mantra that everyone likes to say. I see more of consolidation, packing people into smaller areas and planes, and fewer flights as far as not flying with only a quarter of the passengers or half full.
Okay, interesting. I want to go back to this idea there of the difference then between military and commercial airline traffic, because there's a difference there, and at least from my perspective, Rosalind, what I've been able to see, over the area where I am, personally in Sweden, there definitely is a military base not too far from here. I hear jets go back and forth. Military jets, they tend to obviously fly lower than usual if they do tests and things like that. But what I see and the planes that I see that it's causing these persistent kind of clouds that are smearing out over the sky, or seems to be anyway, I say, because I don't have proof of that, but it seems to be pertaining to the commercial airline traffic, So what I would like to ask you is if we can talk a little bit about the fuel again, then, if you believe that there could be a change in the fuel, meaning that we're not talking about a program where people are involved and if you will, then in the know of what is going on, but this could actually simply just be down to the fact of a change in the fuel that is given to the commercial airlines. What do you think about that, Rosalind?
That could be a possibility, but also I do believe, despite this, that commercial airlines are leaving trails of persistence and these odd, smeary, man-made clouds, high cirrus, high haze, all of this. And I think I have come to the conclusion from all of my research that I think it's deliberate to absolutely cover our skies in these man-made clouds and haze. I think it is. And I think that the warming is deliberate from this process as well.
Interesting. Yeah. So they're definitely part of some kind of experimentation program. I want to ask you a little bit later about NASA, NOAA, what they've been up to. You've been attending, I think, some of those meetings, and we'll talk about that. But do you know who produces the jet fuel today, if that's in accordance to those who develop the engines, and if you will, then they're given a recipe, and then the different gas companies are producing it, or do you know who's behind that, Rosalind?
Well, what it is about jet fuel is that the military has unlimited funding. So when you talk about jet fuel, the Navy, for example, uses JP5 jet fuel for the most part, and then they put additives in it for different performance capabilities. So what happens is that the Air Forces use JP8, JP10. There's different kinds of uses, and the manufacturers, of course, that manufacture regular jet fuel will manufacture for the specifications for the military, and then the military purchases it. So I don't think that there's any restrictions. The military just orders what they want, and then Boeing builds the engines and the jets, and these different manufacturers build the jets to the configuration that they want. Then they put this type of jet fuel in it.
So someone suggested to me that when they looked at the map, or I stumbled over this information actually on the web, and that was pertaining to some of the maps as well, and the intra flights that you discovered, because the maps carried a logo, and I want to get your take on this, from a company called Attack. Interesting name, of course, but ATAC.com is the website for there, and they are allegedly experts in aviation simulation and analysis. So someone suggested that the yellow lines on the maps, the intra flights, were pertaining to simulated and not actually real flights. Have you heard about that, Rosalind? And what's your take on that, if so?
No, those were real flights, because they were given by the FAA to Congressman Mike Thompson as being actual flights and the flight paths over our county on that particular 24-hour period.
And then, Rosalind, we have the question of, obviously, if all the military flights are mapped and tracked, and who has access to that, because again, there is a difference here then, right? So we could also be talking about flights which are not showing up in the official record. Do you believe that could be true?
That could be true too. I can't speak to that, but there could be flights that they don't want tracked, and so the FAA then wouldn't put them on the maps. And that could be quite true too. But the interesting part is the commercial airlines, because the straight line track patterns, from those maps we can watch where they fly all the time. So we know exactly where they are, and you can see them from where we are. So people can follow where the actual flight of commercial airlines are going versus these other planes that deviate consistently.
I see. So why don't we talk a little bit about some of the programs, if you will, then, that are running within NASA and NOAA and so forth, and what their particular angle might be, and what you think about that. You've attended some meetings, I believe, and maybe we can talk specifically about something called NASA Ames, perhaps, Rosalind.
Yes. In 2006, there was a week-long meeting held at NASA Ames in California, and they discussed geoengineering was the main topic in November 2006. And they opened it up to the public for a day, and they had many of the speakers speak at this public forum on geoengineering at that time. And geoengineering is talking about, in this reference, of atmospherically putting up programs that would modify the environment in the atmosphere or through the oceans. So you could have ocean iron fertilization, for example, in our oceans, which is ongoing, or you could have upper atmospheric particle and chemical releases, where they would try to restrict the amount of direct sunlight reaching the Earth in order to allegedly cool us down.
Now, do you believe that that's true? Do you think that from their point of view, then, this is a benevolent motive? They're just trying to experiment. They're trying to see if this has any effects because they are truly concerned, I guess, about global warming. Do you think that could be the case?
No, I don't think they're concerned about global warming. And here's why. If they were concerned about global warming, then they would be tackling the aviation problem of the jets and the water vapor releases by the jets because it's a greenhouse gas. And they would be tackling the problem of increasing water vapor from aviation over the Arctic and Alaska in order to decrease melting. And so their expertise would be directed in reducing our impact. And in other words, those programs immediately, in order to move those areas into not warming. And as it is, what I think is happening is that in order to get into the Arctic and Alaska in certain areas which are normally frozen over, have been in the past, the oil companies and can't exploit the natural resources, and different countries can't exploit the natural resources in those areas. So if you warm up those cold, frozen areas so that they can be exploited, there's a financial reward to that could be astronomical.
Interesting.
I'm really thinking that it's a deliberate attempt to warm those areas deliberately. Otherwise, the geoengineering group would be talking about reducing the impact of aviation today, and the hearings from the UK Parliament to the US House of Representatives would have had experts on that talking about aviation, which they did not.
Was this the Global Geoengineering Governance? Was that a meeting, or it's an umbrella name for something, right?
Let me explain what has taken place since 2009. The UK Parliament has held a series of hearings with reports involving geoengineering the programs and global geoengineering governance. In other words, where they would set up a governing body to allow these different geoengineering programs to be initiated with rules and regulations. And at the same time, the UK was going through these meetings and hearings. The United States House of Representatives Science and Technology Committee held 3 hearings, one in 2009 and 2 in 2010, on geoengineering and also global geoengineering governance. In other words, to set up a funding mechanism and to set up a way that they could start putting these programs into operation. But what was interesting about both of those is that they never, only the promoters really of these programs were allowed to speak at either hearing. They didn't have anybody in forestry to talk about the acid rain problems from putting up particles and chemicals into the atmosphere. They didn't have anyone from ocean scientists, biologists. No one was speaking on any of the adverse consequences, which were admitted during the course of those hearings, but which were they never had anyone questioning, in other words, these so-called climate scientists on their schemes. Mm-hmm. What they did is they were only having testimony mostly from people that wanted to implement them.
I see. It's very, very interesting. There's so many different, aspects to look at of why the motive would be for this, of course. And a little bit later, I want to get into some of the particulates that you've been speaking about that's been found. There seems to be an increase in certain chemicals, metals, and so forth as well. We'll address that. There was a few other things I want to talk with you about. Has to do with the cloud seeding again then, because the idea, I guess, is with a thicker cloud layer, you'd have more sunlight bouncing back into space, and therefore we'd have a cooling effect. So from their point of view, or one of the reasons we're given, I guess in that sense, an unofficial reason so far, would be that this is the way to combat global warming. But as we've seen, or as many people have reported, there's other things in the actual clouds, and I don't know if this is the case with all cloud seeding, but in some cases there seems to be metals in there as well. And maybe we can talk a little bit about how you've managed to track this, or the samples that you've taken that indicates an increase in things like barium, aluminum, and things like that, Rosalind.
Okay, you've asked me about 4 or 5 questions here, so let's kind of start through the grouping.
Okay.
Okay. The first thing, talking about how I know that there's an increase in chemicals and particles, is that the United States is conducting upper atmospheric tests and have been for years. And in these upper atmospheric tests, which you can read about in the aluminum section or the barium section on my websites, either CaliforniaSkywatch.com, or you can go to agriculturedefensecoalition.org. I list these various upper atmospheric experiments which the United States Navy, the United States Air Force, and NASA have been conducting for years. And they do use aluminum, trimethyl aluminum, barium, strontium,